It is May 2024 and Adobe has just released their latest updates to Lightroom, Lightroom Classic, Lightroom Mobile, and Adobe Camera Raw. Now, although this is a mid-year update, we're once again seeing that they are pushing a fairly major release here that includes several new and improved elements, but what we want to talk about here today is one thing in particular, and that is AI Generative Remove. This is brand new to Lightroom and Adobe Camera Raw ecosystem. It's available across all of the applications, both desktop and mobile, but it is important to note that this is an early release or early access version of it so far, so essentially a public beta. Now, even though this does come along with several other updates, again, I'm just going to focus on the one thing here. Everything else is pretty straightforward or behind the scenes. This is the one element that really has a major implication in terms of your day-to-day workflow. So what I'll be doing in this video is giving you some demonstrations, some tips and tricks in terms of how to use this new generative AI, starting out with relatively basic object removal, moving up into more advanced and complicated things. Before I jump into the tutorial portion of this, I do want to give a shout out to my latest Patreon members. This is something fairly new that I'm offering. If you do enjoy the videos that I put out and you get value or entertainment out of them, one of the best ways you can support this channel and my photography in general is to become a Patreon member. There's various levels. Silver level and above gets you access to early release videos. In most cases, something like this, I'm unable to release early, but it is over on my Patreon for silver members and above as an ad-free version along with some other videos. And with all of that out of the way, let's just jump on into the demo. All right, so here I am in Lightroom Classic. I've just got a photo of my buddy's truck driving by back when we were in Oregon in 2021. We'll start with a simple example, and I'm going to kind of work upwards in terms of complexity to really show what this is capable of. So the first thing to note is you've got your eraser icon here, the remove tool. You can either click on it or press the Q key to open it up. And right away, you see some pretty significant differences in terms of the user interface. Overall, it's now referred to as remove, and you've got three modes. You've got your remove mode, your traditional heal, and your traditional clone. Those last two have not changed in any way, shape, or form, so there's no difference in functionality there. The only exception would be one nice user interface change that's long overdue that makes way more sense than where it was in the past is you now have your tool overlay and visualize spots within the actual remove tool panel, whereas before it was always down in the lower left corner and people would struggle to find it, or they would accidentally enable visualize spots and wonder why the image looked weird and not be able to find that easily. So now it's included within the panel really as it probably should have been all along. Now in this first mode, again, this is called remove. You can see we've got generative AI. You can click on this to go to some more information from Adobe about it, but obviously it's noted as early access. And then you also have object aware. Now the important thing to note here is if you do not click generative AI and you do healing or removal with the tool as it is without that box ticked, it's using the existing or pre-existing content aware remove, which does analyze the image as a whole to try to match the scene and remove the object you want to remove, but it's not AI based. To use the actual AI-based functionality that's been added, you do need to click and enable the generative AI. Then you have object aware, which works just like object masking in the mask panel. You just simply paint around an object and it'll auto-detect it. You can refine it from there as well, so I'll show that. That works with both the generative AI and the content aware remove tool as well, which is a nice little addition. Again, I'll show that in a little bit. And then the other thing to note here is down at the bottom, you do have the ability to provide feedback on generative remove. If you see some weird results or anything like that, you can actually send that feedback back to Adobe. So let's just start off here with this quote unquote simple remove. Now, again, if I leave the generative AI box unticked and I leave object aware unticked, it's going to work like it's always worked. You're just going to come out, you're going to paint over the object that you want to remove. And as soon as I release, it's going to analyze the scene and it's using content aware to try to fill that in. As you can see, we're not getting a very good result. I can click the refresh button to have it reanalyze and try to come up with a better result. But we're not getting very good results here at all. Now, I made a pretty sloppy selection, but still, there are obvious limitations here when we're using content aware. Same thing if we're using heal or clone. So if I remove this completely, just come out and right click and delete, and I enable generative AI, and I enable object aware, now I can come out, adjust my cursor size to something reasonable, and I can simply make an outline around the truck because I want to remove that. I'm going to include the shadow. And as soon as I let go, it's going to analyze what I've painted around and try to make that object detection. So you can see that it's done a fairly good job of selecting the object. You do want overlap with the surrounding scene so it can pull in the edges properly, but you'll note that it did remove parts of the shadow from my selection. So now if we look up at the remove panel, you see you've got mask refinement. Just like we're used to, you can change the color overlay as well as the opacity. So if I want to say, let's bring the opacity down a bit so I can see what I'm doing a little bit easier, you can do that. But I've also got mask, add, and subtract. And it works just like brushing in your masking tool. So right now it defaults to add. And I want to make sure I'm including the shadow because I don't want to remove the truck, but leave the shadow, obviously. So I'm just going to come in here and paint. And now I've added that extra area into my selection. Now, if I needed to erase something, let's say I went too far, I can either click on the subtract and come out here, and that's just going to subtract it from my mask. Or I could leave it on add. Let me paint this back in to include that shadow. And then if I hold down the Alt or Option key, it's going to give me the inverse of whatever mask refinement I've got selected. So I had add selected. As soon as I hold down Alt or Option, it's going to change it to subtract. And I can come in here and easily subtract. Conversely, if I were on subtract and I accidentally erase something, I could hold down Alt or Option and come back in and paint that back in. Once you've got your mask refined to the point you want it, if you need to make any refinements, simply hit apply. As soon as you do that, you see it's going to start generating. This is analyzing the scene using the AI model. And it's going to come up with a result removing the selected object. Now you'll now notice that within the panel you have variations. So you've got variations 1 through 3 and then refresh. So you're only going to be able to cycle through 3 generated variations. If you're not happy with any of those though, simply hit the refresh button and it'll produce 3 new variations for you to take a look at. Now I can easily come in here and cycle through to see if there's one I like better than the other. That one's not too bad, but again, if I don't like any of these, I can refresh. It'll go through the generation process again using the AI model. And I've got 3 new options that I can cycle through. That one doesn't look too bad. That one looks pretty good. But you can see that it's doing a pretty impressive job. And if I hold down the space bar, I can zoom in here while the tool is active. It does a fairly impressive job of even matching the depth of field blur and things like that. Now, obviously, when we zoom in, we do see some flaws. There's a pole here sticking up that it didn't account for in the actual area that I selected to remove. But just that easily, in the matter of a few clicks, really, I'm getting a far better result than I ever could have gotten with the old tools. If I reset completely and remove all of my healing and come back in and just do subject selection again, or object aware selection, and again, I'm going to use the mask refinement to add that shadow back in. Hit apply. So there's another result. That one's not bad. The cloud of dust here is a little overdone, perhaps. I can look at my second option. That one actually looks really good. Or I can look at option 3, which is an example of where you get something a little bit wonky. I'm not entirely sure what that is. It looks like a robot arm sticking out or something. So you can see you're not always going to get great results, or you might have little bugs. Again, keeping in mind this is early access. But looking at those first 2 options, and really the second one in particular, that's really, really impressive. And again, nothing that I ever could have done that easily or really accurately using any of the old tools, whether it's content aware, heal, or clone. Let me jump to the next example, and we're just going to run through a few different examples, again, kind of getting more complex as I run through them, and we'll wrap up the video. This actually happens to be another scene from that Oregon trip back in 2021. I've always liked this photo, but the branches in the foreground, which I knew were there when I took the shot, my intent was always to remove those using the existing or the older tools in Lightroom, but I was never really getting very good results. Even using content aware, I would get weird borders or mismatch of the rushing water and things like that. Now with this new generative AI tool, it's a complete game changer. In this case, I'm going to disable or turn off object aware because I'm not really worried about that. I'm just going to come in, I'm going to paint over this little thing. So I can come in here. The other thing you can do is you can do multiple in one pass. So I'm going to select all these little things that I want to remove, poking into the frame that were interfering with things. Again, I've got my add and subtract if I wanted to do so. Now that I've got all my brush strokes here, I'm going to hit apply. Going to analyze the image again and do its thing. And if it works like it did when I tested this, we're going to get a really good result right off the bat here. And again, I technically could have done this with the old tools. It would have required a ton of different remove points or heal points, and I still may not have gotten as good of a result as what I should be able to get here with the new generative remove. It's taken a little bit longer because I selected multiple areas to remove. And I mean, just like that, look at that result. If I turn this on and off with the eyeball, if I was looking at this for the first time, I would not be able to tell you what had been adjusted within the frame. It does a really nice job of matching the direction and the textures of the water. I come over to the edges here, you can see I've got pins here where I made those additional brush strokes. Really, really, really nice job. And again, I've got 3 different variations, so I can always see there's one that works a little bit better. Now, one thing to call out, if I go in and refresh this and create 3 new options, I can't technically get back to the previous 3 options, but as you cycle through each one, it does add it into your history. So technically, I can always get back to previous variations even after a refresh of the heal, which really it shouldn't say refresh heal, it should be refresh remove, but regardless, I can always get back to those older ones that I've cycled through in the past. But now I've got my new options, so I'm not sure I like that first one quite as much. Go to the second one, that looks pretty good. Go to the third one. And I think out of these, I like the second one the most. But on my previous set, I think I actually like the second one the most. Second or the first one, you can know which one you're looking at because there's a number indicated here. So that tells me this is variation 1. That was variation 2. That was variation 3. So that's my previous set. And I can go through and find the one that I think works best. I'm just going to stick with that first option. So you can see right there, very, very easily with 3 different brush strokes, I was able to apply them all at once and get a really, really clean remove that I would have spent probably half an hour working on before with the old tools and still maybe not gotten as good of a result. And again, if I zoom in here, you can see from a resolution standpoint, that looks pretty good. You can't really tell anything is going on there that wasn't in the original file. Moving on to another example that's more complex. Again, Oregon. I've had some images in my backlog for a while that I've been hoping and praying maybe Adobe would make some improvements to the remove functionality in Lightroom, and here we are. So here, of course, is a classic scene. If I zoom in on this, actually, let me fill. So we can see here I've got some people in the frame that I would like to remove that were intruding on the composition I set. You also see I've already got some pins here. So if I temporarily disable this by clicking and holding on the eye, you can see I've already made a relatively complex removal. And I would put pretty good money on the fact that anybody that was just looking at the file before I showed you that I would remove that person in the frame would have ever known that they were there, even zoomed in like this as I am at about 40% zoom. Now, if I go in and zoom in at 100%, we're going to take a look at this gentleman. I'm going to try to do object aware. So I'm just going to make a quick selection around him. We're going to come down, make sure we're overlapping the edges well enough. Let it do its analyzation. I've got the selection made so you can see it removed part of his leg here. So I'm just going to do a quick brush stroke to add that back in. I'm going to hit apply. And you can see that once it ran through the AI modeling, it actually did a really impressive job with what was a pretty sloppy selection. Now, this one column in particular, there's a little bit of blur in here that I wouldn't necessarily want. So how could I go about addressing that? Well, you may notice also that there's still a refine button up here. So if I hit that, it's going to bring that item in that I removed and bring my masking back up. So now I could come in here and again, I can click on subtract or I can hold down the Alt or Option key, whether I'm on Windows or Mac. And I could say, well, you know what? I don't actually want to remove any of the pillar or any of the railing. So I'm just going to erase this out. Now, there does seem to be a little bit of a bug in it right now in that when you're doing this refine, the brush strokes don't actually change until you stop moving. So click and drag. It's not showing real-time removal. I would assume that that'll be fixed in a future release. But if there's something here I don't want it to mess with, I can just erase it out of the mask. And then hit apply, and it'll run through the AI modeling again, and we should see a much better selection. And there we go. Now if we toggle it on and off, you can see that it's really not impacting the bridge at all because I removed that from the masking. There's a little bit of an area down here where it's clipping a little bit out, so I could go and further refine that, but hopefully you get the point that you can tweak and massage the selections as needed to get a better result. And now when I was playing with this one earlier, I wasn't getting the greatest result doing this all in one big selection, so I just ended up splitting it into 3 different selections, one for the upper half of his body, and then one for this leg, one for that leg. In this particular case, luck would have it that I was able to do one big selection, just make a simple refinement, and I'm getting a pretty nice result right off the bat. And again, I've got my 3 different variations I can look at to see what works best from a background standpoint with the cascading water back there, what looks best for the bridge standpoint, which might be another reason you'd want to split into multiple removes, is maybe on one you get a better water result, but on another you get a better result on the railing and the generation of the railing in the background. Again, he was hiding the part of the railing in the background down here on the far side of the bridge. So as luck would have it, I'm pretty happy with what it generated, but again, maybe the water would be better in one generation, but that background railing would be better in a different generation. By doing it all in one like this, I don't have control over that. I've got to pick one that addresses both as best as possible. So it's something you've got to play with, but you can see how absolutely quick and easy it is, and it's doing a fantastic job. And again, I'm zoomed in at 100% here, and from a resolution standpoint, a texture quality standpoint, I can't tell. Again, if I were looking at this file for the first time with this remove done, I wouldn't be able to tell you where it was actually applied. Now, if I zoom back out here, hold down the space bar and click while the tool is active, I can zoom back out. You can see in this particular one, it did do it in 3 different removes. That was due to the complexity with the branches. Trying to do it all at once was too much, and I was getting some weird results in terms of the branches, so I just split it up a little bit. If we take a look at this person here and say, well, let's remove them. Let's come in here. We're just going to make a quick outline around their head. We're going to leave as much of the railing unselected as possible. A fairly good selection on the head, but it's picking up this branch just a little bit, so I'm just going to hold down Alt-Option and brush that out. It also did pick up a little bit of the railings, so I'm going to brush that out as well. Now I'm going to hit Apply. And just that easily, that person's head is no longer intruding on the scene. And I can come down here and do the same thing kind of one by one for this area. Now, it may not recognize an object here given the complexity of the leaves and the pillars and everything, but actually it did. It did lose a little bit of this leg down here, so let me just brush that in. And we'll apply. And we can see we did not get a very good result on that one. And all of these are struggling a little bit. So I could refresh. I can try doing smaller selections and again, playing with it. Maybe instead of one bigger selection, I would need to do 2 or 3 smaller selections. Odds are you'd be able to get the result you want though. But overall, you can see, without spending too much time in terms of the demoing, how good of a job this is doing. I mean, even this result, it's not what we want because it removed the stone post from the bridge here, but the actual result still looks good. It still looks like stone, so can't really complain about that. It did a good job of generating leaves and branches and things, so still got a good result, just not the result that we wanted. Let's move on to another example here. So looking at this one, you can see at this gentleman's face, I've already got a remove applied on this one. And you may ask yourself, well, if you did a remove there, why is his head still shown? If I hover on it, you can see that it was specifically targeting his head. The fun thing here is because I didn't remove the entire object, that's this guy's real face. This is the AI generated one. And again, maybe you can tell after the fact, but I think the default generation, again, coming in and looking at this without knowing any differently, I would have no idea that this was not this person's actual face. The other thing to point out is that's actually where the image started. So I had this person's partner and their 2 dogs in the scene, and using the AI remove, I've already removed them. And again, I don't think anybody that's watching this video, let alone looking at the file in person like I am, would be able to notice, especially zoomed out like this, that there's any difference. If I were to zoom in, even then, I'd say it's pretty hard to tell. If you really inspect it, you can see there's a little bit of difference in this tree trunk here. You've got more textured bark, and it gets a little soft here as it's struggling with the depth of field and the blurred background and things. But for the most part, it's done a pretty good job. And I did this in one big selection, so again, if I did this, broke it into multiple selections, odds are I'd get even better results. But just giving you an idea of the power of the tool here. And then we'll wrap this up with one last one to take a look at. Now, if you've watched some of my past demonstrations, you may be familiar with this gentleman, this stock photo, and you may notice that something is different about it. So the question is, and I'll give you a moment or pause to the video here, take a look at this and try to figure out what has been changed. And to make it a little bit easier, let me actually zoom in. And I'll use my navigator window to kind of move around. So let's take a look at the frame. What might I have changed or removed in this scene or in this photo? All right, time's up. So let me zoom back out here and let me go to my before view. So maybe drop down in the comments what you guessed was different about this photo and how close or how far off you were. So again, if I look at before and after, I've made some pretty significant changes or removals from the scene, from this red drainage pipe in the background, removing his hat, removing this flower on the windowsill, changing the topiary, and even removing the ring on his finger with just a few relatively simple selections using Generative Remove. Now, if I go to the altered version and I open up the tool, and right now I've got tool overlay set to auto so that all of these adjustment pins or remove pins, they disappear once I move my cursor off of the actual image. You can also change this to always so that they're always going to be visible, selected, and never. I usually keep it on auto, but anyways, if you're wondering why sometimes the pins are there, sometimes they aren't, that's why. But if I bring this out here, you can see I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 different adjustment pins. So I've actually gone as so far as to remove the ring on his finger. Nope, actually 6 pins. I forgot about the tie. See, I'm even fooling myself. This is doing such a good job. So I was curious to see what it would do with his tie. I wanted to change it from colorful to something else. Again, I don't have control over what it generated, but I'm able to basically alter it or replace it just by the nature of how this worked. I did get one result that removed it completely rather than replacing it. So it's, again, something you can kind of play around with. But I think what's most impressive on this one is the removal of the hat. So again, if I look at before and after, it did just an absolutely fantastic job of removing that naturally, blending in the generated hair wonderfully and really matching his actual hair. If you look at that, it's not a different hairstyle or anything like that, or length. It's done a very, very good job of looking at the little bit of hair that was visible and generating something that makes sense with the removal of that hat. And there you go. Even though this is a huge update in terms of functionality and capability within Lightroom, Lightroom Classic, and all that ecosystem, it's fairly straightforward to use once you understand the different tools and steps and tweaks available to you to get the most out of this new AI-powered Generative Remove. And wrapping up, just once again, thank you to my Patreon members for helping support the channel. And as always, until next time, take care.